I'm Deborah Small, and I want to follow up on a point that was made by Harry and also make another point that I think is important to this conversation that we're having. The first has to do with the issue of arrests and how it relates to the reason why we have marijuana prohibition in the first place. I feel like in the conversation, we often forget that the whole reason that we have marijuana prohibition was because it was designed to reduce the ability of Mexicans to compete economically. Every prohibition we have is economically rooted. It's not about the drugs, it's about competition. And so for me, the fact that we keep having this conversation about getting rid of marijuana prohibition, and we talk about the people who are getting arrested, but we don't talk about the reasons why. And it's not just because of racism, it's also about economics. It's about the fact that Black male and Latino unemployment is over 25, 35. In my city, it's 40%. Arresting people is a great way of not having to deal with that economic reality. I feel like we don't talk about that here. You will never, ever get the place that we're talking about getting with full regulation and control as long as drug laws serve the same economic purpose that they have always served in terms of limiting competition and keeping certain people out of the economic marketplace and their ability to compete as labor. So I would like for us, maybe not this conference, but at some conference, to actually talk about the role that prohibition plays in maintaining postmodern capitalism, which is the other point that I wanted to make, which is that, you know, again, if you go back to the 60s and look at one of the reasons that Richard Nixon declared war on drugs, it wasn't just about reinforcing law enforcement. It was also about dealing with the anti-capitalistic aspect of marijuana use in America. And it's like we, again, don't talk enough about that. The role that certain drugs had in having people question what was considered their preconceived role in society. Well, we're at an important juncture right now in terms of where Americans are about thinking about where we are economically and where we're going. There are many people who are actually questioning the legitimacy of the sort of global capitalistic system that we're in. And yet I don't see this community contributing to that per se. And I think that one of the reasons that marijuana is prohibited is because of the way in which it can encourage people and inspire people to think differently about the way in which they relate to their society. And I will say that I'm a little troubled, although not completely, about the elements of what I call cannabis capitalism that I see as becoming a more prominent place in this conversation, and not the aspects of marijuana use and cannabis use that are about confronting authority, that are about developing social movements, that are about encouraging people to actually take on and defy authority. There's a reason why things are the way they are, and if we forget those roots, then we also lose sight of part of the avenue that's going to take us out of it. So I don't want us to not actually have part of our conversation be about encouraging people to look at cannabis as a form of resistance, not just to law enforcement, but to the economic slavery that we're all tied into, that has us not be willing to see that whether our neighbor is healthy is an important issue for us. It's not just about how can we generate more taxes to help feed the behemoth in Washington that's using it for war. It's how can we use it to make our society better, which is my final point, which is this. It's like having racial justice and economic justice as an integral part of drug policy is part of what it has to be, because that's part of the reason we have prohibition in the first place, is to keep people from actually having those conversations about racial justice and economic justice. And if we don't start including that as being an integral part of what we're fighting for and why we're fighting, then we lose the reason why we're here in the first place. Thank you.
How are we going to top that? Thank you.
I wanted to show a slide, but I can't.
Deborah Peterson Small. I hail from New York.
What part of New York?
Harlem.
I worked in Harlem.
Really?
I worked at the Apollo Theater for 7 seasons.
Oh my God, I just moved from 129th and Madison.
I lived on 116th and Lenox. I lived on 135th Street.
Would you believe that apartments now cost $1.2 million on Lennox Avenue and
I've been up
100?
there.
I mean, is it ridiculous or what?
I was there for the inauguration, and it makes no sense to me. See, I was there in the 90s when white people used to come through Harlem on the tinted buses, and they were doing the lottery, and they would just pick out which building that they wanted, and they was buying them for $1 and fix them up. Believe me, I know what time it is.
I'm just so frustrated because now I'm living in Jersey because I can't afford to be in Harlem anymore.
But you have everything you need for tomorrow.
I'm good. I got you. Thanks. Don't worry about that. I got the cable.
Deborah Small.
Deborah Small. So this is real, and I mean, I feel that like even being here, I felt like yourself, someone as you never know about somebody till you hear them speak. So, and I don't prejudge people anyway, but as you know, we are definitely underrepresented up here, and to be the casualties of this industry. You know what I'm saying? And so much more from racial profile.
Well, that's why I spoke on it, because I just feel like there's a lot of conversation about arresting responsible marijuana users, but people don't generally define them as being Black and Latino youth. And yet those are the majority of the people who are being arrested all over the country.
And the reason we were underrepresented here is because of economics.
It's that, but it's also, I think. So who are you making this tape for?
You know what? This is for my film company, DSmlls Productions. I have Congressman John Conyers on my site.
I know Brother Conyers.
I got Tommy Davidson on my website.
Okay.
I shot the
Okay, no, I just want to know, because I don't feel like this is an environment that's particularly friendly for our people.
You know what? And that's why we go. That's why we're here to make. That's why we're doing this here right now. With the absence of them having a stage, not a stage here, to kind of balance and offset.
And it's not that I disagree with people's goals, because I actually do believe that what we need to do is end marijuana prohibition. You know, I work on drug policy issues. I think that most people don't realize that not only in the U.S. but globally, the vast majority of the drug war is about cannabis prohibition, which is beyond a waste of time. But the point that I was making here, and that I would want to make for your audience, is that to me this isn't really about drugs. This is really about social control and economic marginalization. And so people keep coming every year and saying, why is it so difficult politically to get change? And I think it's because people forget why we have prohibition in the first place. We don't have prohibition because someone did a study and said cannabis is so dangerous, we need to get rid of it. Opiates are so dangerous, we need to get rid of it. Cocaine is so dangerous, we need to get rid of it. Every single drug law that we have was linked to a minority, whether it was Asians and opiates, Black people and cocaine, Mexicans and marijuana. And so it's not an accident which drugs we chose, and it's not an accident which people are targeted. And unless you deal with the role that prohibition plays in continuing that ability to marginalize people, which was basically about economics. So whenever there was competition, too much competition, economic depression, you had criminal justice, in this case drug laws, coming to target that group of minorities that people didn't want to have to compete with anymore. And regardless of the people's change in attitude about cannabis, the level of economic difficulty that we're in hasn't changed. So we still have a problem with too much unemployment of Black people, too much unemployment of Hispanic people, and you can't just say we're not going to hire you anymore because you're Black or Hispanic, but you can say I'm not going to hire you because you got a record, I'm not going to hire you because you're a felon.
Can you tell me this though, right? Answer this, because I'll never hear this ever asked, right? When physical slavery was in existence in this country, Black men ain't never had no problem with finding no work.
Well, no, because they were forced to work.
Okay.
And now we're still forcing people to work, except we got to lock them up first, and then we force them to work.
Well,
okay, I go to
right?
prisons and I find brothers doing jobs there that they can't get on the outside. And the bottom line to me is that you're never going to get an end to prohibition until you actually begin to deal with the problems of economic justice in this society, because the drug war is a way of ensuring the perpetuation of poverty.